Travillian Next is a division of Travillian, a financial services specialist search and talent advisory firm. Since inception, the Travillian team has dedicated itself to enhancing the return on investment of a company's most important resource, its people.
Hello. Great guest today. It's been a pretty wild couple weeks in the banking world, to say the least. Wanted to get my friend on, Phil Goldfeder, the new CEO from American Fintech Council. Congratulations, Phil, on that. And we know Phil very well from his time at Cross River, where you spent, you're the SVP of, I think, public policy and government
public
relations?
affairs. Yeah, public affairs.
Yep. So thank you so much for joining us, Phil. I know it was like short notice last week. I sent you a text and I said, let's get you on because, our network and there's just so much happening right now that just wanted to hear from your perspective, knowing that you spent a lot of years in politics. You've been, in the middle on the banking side. Now you're working for American Fintech Council. Can you give the audience just a little bit of your background and and then a little bit on American Fintech Council?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Keith. Really a pleasure to be here. And I know people there's a lot of people that you could have gone to for insight and conversation. So I appreciate you thinking about me and American Fintech Council. And so I had a whole career in politics, coming out of New York City, working for Mike Bloomberg as the mayor, working for Senator Schumer as a senior advisor, before actually running for office myself and serving 3 terms in the New York State legislature. Sort of after a career in government, the idea of how do I continue public service or my work in public service, but in the private sector. I joined Cross River Bank because Cross River Bank was doing something different, not your traditional bank, but a bank that engaged in fintech and had been engaged in fintech since as early as 2010, with the idea of creating access to financial services where it was starting to disappear. The concept of reaching consumers where they are by utilizing safe and reliable innovation was something that spoke to me, right? As traditional banking services continued to disappear, the idea of engaging with innovation to meet consumers where they are and create access to credit and access to capital and access to financial services and access to people's money when they want it on their time frame, not on the 9 to 3 or 9 to 5 that a traditional bank was open. And so after 5.5 years, the idea of really trying to find new ways to impact the industry to create access, the opportunity to join the American Fintech Council as their CEO was something that was very, very exciting opportunity. Yeah. I had worked to start the American Fintech Council. Cross River was one of the founding members of the American Fintech Council. And just to give your audience an idea, the American Fintech Council is a trade association based here in DC. Happy that I'm here today. That supports and advocates for responsible fintech companies that believe in transparency, that believe in a regulatory structure, that look to support consumers and create access to financial services. And more importantly, I can't say this enough, believe in a standard, right? And so it's not the idea of just creating innovation to push things out the door, push products out the door, but responsible innovation. So not innovation just for the sake of innovation, but innovation to actually find ways to help consumers. And so we are the leading advocacy organization for fintech companies, for BaaS banks, for payments companies, for lending companies, and all of the above and across many verticals across fintech. And so I'm only in my 3rd week. Exciting to be here at the American Fintech Council. And again, this is quite an exciting time to be in this industry.
Yeah, what a time to start, huh? 3 weeks ago. Now, so what have you seen kind of down there in the trenches over the last 3 weeks? What have you kind of heard or seen from the government or the Fed on how they're going to go forward with regulation? It's probably too early to really tell, but I feel like this is a seismic event for banking. What has happened over the last 2 weeks feels a little different than 2008. Just from that seemed to be a credit issue. This seems to be a combination of a bunch of things. Risk management, is near the top. But how do you think this is going to shift the political landscape or the regulatory agencies going forward, specifically for BaaS banks, community banks, and kind of the fintechs they partner with?
So I think key is, and it's funny, I talk about this a lot. The key word here is information and how quickly we share it nowadays, right? It was so interesting last weekend, the weekend where all of this was going down, the idea that so many bankers were saying it was reminiscent of 2008, right? There was this fear and there was this mentality of we have to get our money out of the banks, or there's an uncertainty around banks. What's different, I think, so different today than it was in 2008, as how quickly information passes from person to person, right? So where in 2008, cell phones existed, but not to where it is today, and social media existed, but not where it is today. Whereas as quickly as certain VCs are posting it in a WhatsApp chat or putting it on Twitter, and all of a sudden it's creating this contagion where it's just a lack of real information. And Keith, you and I have talked about this before. I think on some level, if people would have left their money, right, unclear what would have happened with Silicon Valley, but maybe with Signature, people would have sort of a certain calm, would have just left their money and let sort of the market play out. Would Signature have gone down? Would First Republic have gone through some of the struggles that maybe they went through? And so once the federal government and the federal agencies sort of created that backstop, sort of it calmed the community, but the damage was done already. And I think information was critical. And now sort of flipping it to post kind of crisis, or it's hard to say post crisis because I think we're going to be in it for a bit. The hardest part today is that most people just don't know. What's it going to look like? What's the new regulatory structure going to look like? What's the FDIC and the OCC and the Fed and Treasury going to do? How are traditional banks going to adjust to those new regs and policy initiatives? And I think as you mentioned, it's just too soon to tell. I know that Congress is starting to think about not just holding sort of some of the banks accountable and to look at some of the mistakes that maybe the banks made, but Congress is also going to look at the regulatory agencies. And did the FDIC do everything that it should have done as quickly as it should have done it? Similar across the board. And so I think there's still a lot of story to be told. I can say that it's an opportunity, right, for BaaS banks, for technology, innovative banks who look at the world in a way of protecting consumers, protecting kind of the diversification of their business model in terms of where they're getting money and how they're getting money and how they're taking in deposits. So I think from disaster creates opportunity for not just community banks, but banks focused on fintech and BaaS to number one, re-examine, make sure they're doing it the right way, and they're working with technologies that are going to do it the right way. But like Cross River and Pathward and Green Dot and so many members of American Fintech Council, SoFi and Lending Club, to reassess, number one, the way they did it, but now look at these opportunities, right? There's an article, as you mentioned in the Wall Street Journal, that small businesses are now becoming more and more experts in what banks they use and what the structures are and what's going to happen if there's another issue. And so more and more people are becoming knowledgeable on the banks and where they're putting their money. And so it creates an opportunity for the smart banks to, number one, utilize innovation and technology, but number two is go after kind of, I think, what is a new market of consumer that is looking for a smarter bank.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I have the article right here, and a business owner in Minnesota said, I think we need to analyze banks just like they analyze us, which is amazing that small businesses now are going to be asking questions that, look, I think that's a positive. You should be asking those questions. But also, like you said before, a major opportunity for community banks to show their worth, their knowledge to help small businesses, just like during, I know you were a big part, Cross River, during the PPP program, getting the technology up and running to help these businesses. And that showed how important it is to have a relationship with your banker, just like you have a relationship with your lawyer. Same thing with your bank now. I mean, you should ask these questions. Am I FDIC insured? IntraFi is something we talked about. Can I sign up for that, where it kind of takes the risk out behind the scenes? How stable is my bank? They're looking at balance sheets probably now. Like, how stable is this bank? Which is,
but when you, I apologize for cutting you off. I mean,
go.
I mean, the beauty of fintech is not like it's not the answer to everything. It's not a one size fits all. That's exactly what makes fintech great, is that it creates optionality for the consumer. And so the beauty of a fintech focused bank is that you're merging two things that are amazing, right? You're merging the trust, reliability, structure of a community bank with the innovative offerings of a technology, like I said earlier, is to meet that consumer where he is. Now, it doesn't mean that that product is going to be right for everybody, right? It just doesn't mean that. It means that that consumer now has another option. And so when done the right way, you're creating optionality for those consumers. And this is the best part, is that the consumer gets to make the choice based on real information. And so credit to the small businesses who are now going to look at this through a new lens and say, wait a second, I don't have to go to that bank just because it's big or just because it's close to me. I can take a look at the offerings of small banks that are using innovation to reach consumers all across the country to make sure I'm getting the best option for my small business.
Yeah. And, we were talking before this call, there's a lot of deposits out there. A lot of deposits. Look, these companies, these are good companies. They didn't really do anything wrong banking with Silicon Valley or Signature. It's really how the bank handled that money that was coming in. So that money is going to go somewhere. It's not like they're going to stop banking. And I think, I've already heard stories, I already transferred my money to a big bank, one of the mega banks, and I can't get them on the phone. So you're going to hear that more often. Small businesses to mega banks, not to put them down, they're huge banks, and they're dealing with Fortune 500 companies and global organizations. Joe's Pizza or, a 50-person company down the street, it's going to be hard to get somebody on the phone there. So doing your research on banking is so important now than it used to be. I feel like, we've learned more about banking in the last 2 weeks, even me, than I ever knew before. And I think the whole general public, because they're all asking, how did this happen? What is my money safe? Those type of questions. So the community bank and the local bank and the BaaS Bank can really step in and say, your money's safe. We understand your business. This is why it's safe. You don't have to worry, those type of things. So they can really be, that partner that businesses are looking for and consumers.
Yeah, and let me just say, from the position of the American Fintech Council, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity as well, right? We talked about regulators and policymakers rethinking how they look at banks. There is a tremendous opportunity for fintech banks, for banks that are operating BaaS products and are working with tech companies. Now is the opportunity to tell the story, right? We're at a unique period in time where we're going to see shift. And so it's not about, we spend so much time. What's interesting is that we spend a lot of time trying to educate regulators and policymakers about what we do. We're at a very interesting juncture where regulators and policymakers are coming to us, right? To ask us, well, wait, what are you guys doing? And how could you use technology to help us judge the way banks are operating or whether consumers are able to access various financial services products? And so for the American Fintech Council, for AFC, we're at a critical juncture in time where we have an opportunity to make a tremendous impact for the industry, for fintech, for non-traditional banks, innovative banks trying to reach consumers in new ways. And so, it's an exciting time, and it's also a scary time, right? Like if we don't do it the right way, if we don't think about regulatory modernization and innovation the right way, unfortunately, there's also the chance that sort of you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? And so it's critical time for all of us, right, to be at your state houses, to be here in Washington, to be advocating for what we do, for who we are, for responsible actors. You're actually creating a tremendous opportunity for those small businesses who are now looking at banking differently. Meaning, I think at one point, okay, there's a bank, I have a small business, I can go put it on that bank in the on my corner, or I want to put it in a big bank, so I'm going to put it in a big bank. I think with fintech banking, there is so much more optionality, and it makes for a smarter consumer, a more optionality for that small business. And like I said, that means the opportunity is now to look at regulatory modernization with a fresh set of eyes, and the opportunity is now for BaaS banks and fintech banks to come together, and that's what we're doing here at the AFC.
I love it, and we need leaders like you in the trenches down there in DC, fighting for the little guy,
Yeah,
the
look,
big banks have their lobbyists down there. We need people fighting for the smaller BaaS banks and FinTechs that are helping out the consumers. So it's great to see.
Yeah, no, look, we find ourselves, I think, change is hard. And I think that a lot of these BaaS banks have embraced the idea that we're going to utilize innovation to reach consumers in a new way. I think now is the time where we work some of that magic in Washington as well to show them what we've done, because it's not theoretical anymore. It's not like, hey, here's what I want to do. It's what we've already done. It's what FinTech has already done. And so now's the time to tell our story. And so this was the time for me, obviously, to come join the American Fintech Council. And I mean, again, you want to make sure that you're utilizing this time correctly and right, and that we're advocating for not, like I said, not just innovation for innovation's sake, but for responsible, transparent innovation that embraces a standard to ensure that consumers are protected.
Yeah. And I think after the last year or so, I think responsible risk, responsible, those type of things, leadership come into play more than ever. Because investors and consumers are armed with a lot of information, and they're gonna be like we were talking before, almost like another auditor of your bank. You're gonna have small businesses asking questions that usually hedge fund people are asking them. Are you diversified? What kind of loans do you? Those type of things. But I think it's a great thing. Public banks, all the information is out there. You can see. But it's great. I mean, the consumer should understand their bank and how they're investing their money. And it's good that consumers are knowledgeable now. I'm sad it had to take, this event, Silicon Valley and everything else, but sometimes it takes like a seismic shock to wake people up to what's happening. So overall, I think for community banks, at least, and BaaS banks, it's going to be a positive.
Absolutely. Look, as I mentioned earlier, it's about information. And I think there's so much information out there that I think BaaS banks, community banks, everybody is sort of in their best interest to make it available, not just to their consumers, and that's the small businesses and the consumers, but also to the regulators. And so I think there's opportunities, as we mentioned, by sharing that information, there's opportunities on both sides. And I think, like I said, if you're doing it the right way, then you have nothing to be afraid of, right? Like, then you should be happy to be transparent and open about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And obviously an opportunity to look at those people who aren't willing to share what that says about them.
Exactly. Yeah. And no, thanks, Phil. And just one last thing, kind of specifically for BaaS banks, the benefit of, joining your organization, being in an organization with you at the helm, all this experience from Cross River and the government, but you also have, it feels like a great opportunity for the BaaS banks to join an organization to help craft legislation and make sure they're being represented in DC. Any advice to them? Probably to give you a call, right?
Yeah, I say reach out. You can go to our website, AmericanFintechCouncil.org. I mean, look, the answer is that do you want someone else deciding sort of what your business model is going to look like? If you're in the business of a bank, you want the opportunity to determine what your own business model is. And I would say, why would you allow others to determine what your regulatory future holds? Come join us. We're sort of the leading fintech advocacy organization, not just here in Washington, but in state capitals all across the country. And so there's not a week that goes by where we're not talking to governors, to attorneys general, to members of state legislatures, as well as members of Congress, to advocate for the best interests and to tell our story. And so I would encourage any BaaS bank to come join us, right? It makes us a more powerful organization. It makes us a more powerful voice so that others are not determining our interests. And it's not just to have a seat at someone else's table, but it's to own our own table. So we can determine our own futures, which I believe is in the best interest of the consumer and the small business.
Oh yeah. I've always said my worst fear is like 20 years from now, there's only 50 to 100 huge banks. It's not good for the consumer. It's not good, especially for small business. We need our community banks. We need the BaaS banks to be the backbone because they're being regulated and they are the backbone for every fintech out there. If all the BaaS banks turn off their light tomorrow, there's no fintech. So
yeah, and there's no access. There's no access to credit.
There's no access at all.
Basic access to financial services, particularly in minority rural communities who are just losing traditional financial services. This offering is creating that access that otherwise would be gone, and so it's important. And it's more importantly, and I say this from my time in government, you have to speak up. If you don't speak up for yourself, someone else is going to speak up for you, and you may not agree with their message. And so I'm urging everybody to come join us, to reach out. I'm accessible and I'm open to having these conversations about who we are, but more importantly, the standard of what we believe in.
Love it. Come join us. Got a feel of a little Braveheart speech coming on there. Follow me into the trenches. But you're exactly right, man. You don't want the mega banks crafting all this legislation and everything without the input of the smaller banks and the BaaS banks and the FinTechs. What's best for them might not be the same for what's best for a JP Morgan. So we got to have somebody like you in the trenches, and I'm glad they landed you, American Fintech Council, and Cross River is probably sad to see you go, but this is a very exciting chapter for you, and thank you so much for your knowledge kind of on this subject and for fighting for, the little guy, really the BaaS Bank, the consumer, the underbanked, whatever. There's a lot of areas of banking that, it's reaching a lot of different corners now, and, it's very important to keep that going, keep that momentum going. So thank you, Phil. Really appreciate it, man. Have a great week. Hopefully it's a less volatile week, but who knows? We shall see.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.